Welcome, Chessable friends. This is the second part of the introduction to the Evans Gambit Beginner's Guide. In the first part, I discussed accepted 5 bishop c5 and declined with 4 bishop b6. And now we're going to look at accepted bishop a5, accepted bishop e7, and accepted bishop d6. This course was created in 2018, but after 7 years, it's still popular. And I'd like to share how I look at the lines. So let's get started. Um, you have e4, e5, and I'm doing this in the lead chess interface because I'm also showing the course philosophy. So after bishop c5, you can see that there are 824,000 games played with the Evans Gambit. And just to remember everyone that my bases are rapid and classical games from 1600 to 2500. So uh, quite serious games. And the question is, how deep do you want to go as a beginner? So if it's 1 in 100, then you talk about positions which occur in, let's say, 8,000 games. But sometimes you need a little bit more support for the plan how to continue. So after b4, right, we are going to the accepted line because we covered declined. And bishop takes b4. And now we have to, we are playing, of course, c3, attacking the bishop. So today, no bishop c5, but we're going to focus on bishop a5, bishop e7, and bishop d6. So bishop a5 is a very strong move and popular, and bishop e7 is also a strong move, but most popular is bishop a5. So let's go there. And to combine, right, they cover 58% of the games, bishop a5. And like I said before, in all accepted variations, so after bishop c5, after bishop a5, after bishop d7 and bishop d6, we continue d4. And after black takes on d4, we castle in all cases except for the case of bishop d7. So after bishop c5, d4, e takes d4, we castle. After bishop a5, d4, e takes d4, we castle. And after bishop d6, d4, e takes d4, we would also castle. But let's continue. So here we have our standard move in all accepted lines. And now we have to see how it continues. So let's have a look, right? 79%. This is being played. Take. And like I mentioned, we castle. And now we get to the first question, how we continue. And you can see d takes c3 occurs in 33% of the moves. And knight e7 in 19% of the moves, and knight f6 in 17% of the moves. And then we have d6. So we have a lot to cover. So let's start with the most popular move, 1/3 of the games, d takes c3. Now we get a typical move in the Evans Gambit, queen b3, and queen b3 leads to an attack on f7. And how is black going to defend? You can see here there are two options, queen e7 or queen f6. So let's go start with queen e7. That's the most popular one, 62% of the games. And now we just take the pawn, right? And of course, when you look at this position, it's a major threat of white to play knight d5. So black is forced to take, and after queen takes e3, we can see we're already +2. And the queen is looking at the pawn on g7, right? So the question is how is black going to defend? And black is going to defend with a move knight f6. And now it's tempting to play e5, but we have our standard bishop a3, right? So look at the bishop shine. The bishop is attacking, and we we force, right? More or less the move et6, and now we play e5. If you look, of course, here we are already down to 2,200 games. So let's say below 1 in 300. So if you remember it up to this point, then you can say I'll figure out the rest behind the board. Um, so you can see here what the most popular moves are: knight e4 and knight takes e5. And let's look at those two. So let's first go to knight takes e5, right? You can see, of course, that's a blunder because we take. The pawn on d6 cannot take, and we pin the queen, and immediately the game is lost. So we are here, right? A lot of pressure. The pawn is threatening to take on f6, and also we're threatening to open up, right? So the alternative in 983 games is 94. Let's quickly have a look. We attack the knight, and where can the knight go? Right, bishop c5, and now we attack the knight one more time. And you can see it. Now we're getting into the woods because the question is like, how is black going to save themselves? And it's plus 2.2, and the d5 is not possible because the pawn on d6 is pinned, and if the knight moves the bishop for us, so white is winning. So going back, right? We saw what did we look at? We looked at the first line, right? Played in 1/3 of the games here, taking on a c3. And we saw after queen b3, queen e7. So let's have a quick look at the other line with queen f6, d takes c3, queen b3, and then queen f6, played in 6,000 games. So it's already under the 100 threshold. And now we play queen bishop g5. So it's impossible for the queen to continue to defend the pawn on c3. Queen has to move, and then we take, right? And now you can see we're below 3,000 games. Again, there is this major threat of knight e5. So black has to take. We take back. And yes, we have now the question is, right, you can see knight e7. We can already take here, and then we have knight to d e5 with a twofold attack on f7. So it's very hard when you go to this position for black to continue their development, right? So the most great move, knight e7, right? I mean, you can say, of course, after it's very natural. What you can see, king takes e7 is the best move, but in practice, in 86% of the cases, black takes with a knight because black would like to castle short. So from a practical perspective, this is again a very good line because players don't like to play king e7 and lose their right to castle. And now we are winning. So let's go back. So we looked at d takes c3, right? So this is the line. One third of the games is d takes c3, and then immediately we attack f7, very thematic move. Um, and then there's queen e7. We take on c3. The knight wants to go to d5. Black has to trade, but we have crushing attack. We open up the center with bishop a3 and e5, and after queen f6. First, we make sure that the queen can no longer defend the pawn on c3. We play bishop g5, and the queen has to go to g6, and then we take on c3, and we continue with a very strong attack. So let's go back. So white castles. Let's go to the next one. Knight e7. And now, if you remember the previous video, if you have this setup, right, there's a big weakness on this pawn. We play immediately knight to g5, right? So there are two attackers. We saw that a few times also in the other video. And in 50% of the cases, right, you can see what happens. It's still 2,800 games, so 1 in 300. But after queen h5, right, we have again this attack, and black can resign. So this is in 50% of the cases. And let's quickly look at d5, right? That's the second alternative. Then we take on f7, king takes f7, and we take on d5, right? And this is, it's kind of interesting. If you would say who plays this. So if I would include, yeah, bullet, and you can see Sergei Sugalko, one of the top players. This is his pet line, and he scores extremely well with it in bullet and in blitz. So this is a very sharp line. But let's have a look, right? So after d5, right, we can see we're down to 1600. So it's like 1 in 500, right? And after knight takes f7, king takes f7, we are down to 94 games. So I included a couple of lines here, so you can find your way, because it's a very uh, unusual situation um, where white has sacrificed the piece, but has full compensation, and it's very dangerous for black. So it's like white has full compensation for a full piece, and you can see the most played move is knight e5, and you just go back, right? And then the question is, how does it continue? But we have full compensation. But I'm curious to learn from you, right? How far do you want to learn this line when you know, right? If we go to this position, um, it's like 1 in 10,000, right? If I'm not mistaken. So this is 1 in 10,000. So you could say, I stop here, or you say, well, this is too sharp to stop. I would like to know a little bit more. And I'm curious to hear your opinion. I included a few lines, made a few informational, so you can explore them, but it's unlikely that you will get them over the board. And we're in good company. So let's go back. So we looked at this line, and we have to here consider. So e takes d4 we covered, right? E takes d4, and then we played We castled like we always do, and then that's our main line. But now let's go back to the second line. So we covered e takes d4, 79% of the cases, and that is d6. So castle, oops, sorry. So here we go. I have to select it maybe with d6. Okay. So again, we go to a standard move, queen b3, taking s7. And now queen d7 and queen e7 are already below 1 in 100, right? But this is like a grandmaster territory, a master territory, right? If you would look here, if I would go back and would say, what is the most played move among masters? You would say 50% is d6. So that has been played most of the time. In lichess, it's only 15% of the cases. Um, so let's see how we continue here. D6. Now we play queen e3. We are attacking, and black can defend the pawn in two ways, with queen e7 or queen d7. So it's 55% queen d7 and 30% queen e7. Queen e7, my main line, with castle. Okay, bishop b6. So now the threat of black is to play knight a5 and trade the bishop on c4 and release some tension. And you can see we don't want to trade on e5. It's the most played move, but we just continue our development, right? So this is the move. I also had it in a correspondence game, knight bd2. So we're at 365, so below 1 in 2000, right? So unlikely that you will get it, but I just continued the line here. And now there are three attackers on this pawn, right? So most likely black will take. We take that. And now you can see knight e7 is most commonly played, but only 89 games. So this is a question for you, right? So in my course, I included a few more moves, which was based on the game Namajarov against Ding, to show what the plan of white is here, right? So you can see white is better, +1. White has a strong center. It's well developed. Black's king is still in the middle. But how do you exploit it, right? And if you look to what Namajarov did, a4, threatening to trap the bishop. So Ding made some moves. Now bishop a3, right? Again, putting pressure. So c6 was necessary to save the bishop. But now the pawn on d6 is no longer defended. And after bishop c7, e5, right? So this is how this grew, this advantage. And you can see, right, if you would just continue the line after d takes e5, because too many attackers, you can take on e5, but you can also just play rook e1, because the pawn on e5 is pinned, because there are two attackers on b7. So I included this and made it trainable moves, but it is very unlikely that you will ever get it over the board. So if you would prefer, I can cut it back and say, well, if you know that you have to play until here, it's fine. And then I could describe the plan of a4, a5, bishop a3, and putting pressure, rook e1, and continuing to milk the space and lead in development. So this is, let's go back, we have d6. queen b3, attacking f7. We had two moves here. 55% queen d7 and 30% queen e7. So let's look at queen e7 for a moment. And now, right, you would like not to play in general d5 because it blocks the bishop on c4. So there has to be a specific reason to limit the activity of the bishop on c4. And here the specific reason is that after the knight moves, there is the threat of queen b5 picking up the bishop on a5. So this has a specific reason and is based on the tactic that if the knight moves away, that white has a double attack on the king and the bishop. So normally you don't play it, but if there's a specific reason, then you could play it. And that's the case here. So knight d4. Because if the knight goes backwards to b8 or d8, again, you can see we're down to 453 games. So one in 2000. Knight takes, e takes d4. And now, picking up this bishop immediately is too dangerous because of queen takes e4. That's too dangerous. And then followed by d3. If necessary, or at least a bishop g4 is coming. So white cannot allow to black to take on e4. So white castles. Bishop e6 to save the bishop against the double attack. Right, and now this is a move by Simon Williams, e5. And why e5? I mean, let me just extend it a little bit and include blitz games. Right, you can see most players would play here a d takes e5. And after d takes e5, we are winning after our standard move. So just as we did with the line in the bishop c5 variation, where we pushed d5 and then after in 2/3 of the cases knight e5 is played. In this case, we are following this recommendation of Simon Williams and say, what are you going to do? And of course, a lot of players, I think, right, would not take with their queen on e5 and put the queen and the king on one line. And then even that is okay, but we can expect that black will take with the pawn, and then after bishop a3, queen f6, right? You can see again, this looks dangerous, but it's very interesting that this is like a uneven material, but you can see that white is completely winning again. And that's, I think, very good practice for beginning players to learn to attack and to have a lead in development. And that's why I like the Evans Gambit so much. So this is a choice to play in this position, which you will unlikely get, to move e5 by Simon Williams. And to it's a calculated risk, right? After queen takes e5, we play knight d2, knight f3. We have an enormous lead in development, and it's a manageable risk, just like grandmasters do nowadays. Okay, so let's go back. So this was bishop a5, d4, and then we had two options. E takes d4, played in 78% of the cases, and d6 in 16% of the cases, combined 94%. Right? So that concludes bishop a5. So now let's go to bishop e7. Again, you're not surprised. We play d4. Our standard move after every accepted gambit. And here, right, let's have a look. There's e takes d4, 200,000, d6, 140,000. Oh, I have to adjust this. Sorry, I have to adjust it. So e takes d4, 47,000, d6, 21,000, and knight e5, 11,000. So e takes d4, most popular, 47,000. So let's go there. You know what we play here. This was the exception, right? We play queen b3. You can see it scores 63%. So good score by white. Now, this cannot be defended because knight h6 will be taken. f6 is not possible because the knight on g8 will be hanging. So black has a counterattack. We take on f7, king f8, queen f4, king takes f7. And now, of course, okay, we are here, queen takes a5. And you can see we are, again, only 1800 games. So if you are here, then you should continue to play it yourself. And again, black has lost the right to castle. We don't want to trade materials, so that's something you should avoid with white because we're down material, right? And as you can see, the most played move here is d takes c3. And we can attack the king. The king goes back to f8. And we pick up the pawn. And you can see we're +1, right? So we have more than enough compensation, but we should avoid any trading, right? So knight f6, no straight, and then queen b3. So don't trade, and this is how this line works. So let's go back. So this is, right? Can we go back? We said 57% of the games here. Continuous e takes d4. And then we get into this queen b3, take on f7, and then take the knight on a5 later. And then we end up in a situation which is approximately +1. So let's go to d6. Right? Again, we continue with queen b3 because f7 cannot be defended. We can get into the same line. And now, let's look at the most popular move. E takes d4. And now, we can pick up the pawn in d7. And again, we're slightly better. So d6, both d6 and e takes d4 don't do anything against the threat of queen b3, but this twofold attack on f7. It's a similar play. Black cannot castle anymore. And so in bishop e7, we should really remember that this bishop is hindering the defense. So let's have a look. Now we get to the most principled move that was played by Anand against Kasparov. Kasparov is playing the Evans Gambit. It's one of the model games. And so you can see most popular here is knight takes e5, but then it becomes very dry. So I select to move bishop e2. Um, and now you can see we're in like 500, so like one in 1600 games. So it's already very specific. Small chance that you will get this because it's like after knight f5, right? We're not playing knight takes e5, but bishop e2 to maintain the tension. The knight is out of play on a5. So let's go to 46% d6, 45% e takes d4. Let's have a quick look. d6. Right, we play queen a4, c6, take, take, knight takes e5. Right, and then knight f6, castle, d1. We're threatening a discovered attack. With the knight, because, right, with threatening, for instance, knight e6, defends the bishop and attacks the queen and attacks the rook. So there will be a double attack. So after d6, we have this check. It's a double attack on the knight and the king. After knight c6, we would have d5, so that's not possible. So c6 is required. And then we have two attackers and one defender on e5, and we pick up the pawn, and we get some kind of dynamic equality. So what happens after e takes d4? Okay, queen takes d4. And now, how does it continue? You can see 150 and 220. And let's see at the master games. You can see it's still following Garry Kasparov against Denmark. And we have knives is short. We also played it a number of times, right? So very good company. So e takes d4, queen takes d4. How do we continue here? This is the master database. Let's go to chess, right? You can see between knight f6 and bishop f6, we cover almost 70% of the moves, and we're already in a low number of games. Knight f6, e5, knight c6, queen h4, knight e5, queen g3, right? So attacks, and then after g6, we recastle. This is we're slightly better, but look at those pieces still not developed, and also the king is still in the middle, and the pawn structure in front of the king at the black castles has been weakened, right? So it's an interesting position to play, for sure. So let's return after queen takes d4. We looked at knight f6, so you can also see bishop f6 is being played here, right? But we have immediately e5, knight c6. Now they have two attackers here, two defenders. So we play queen e5, knight e7, attacks the queen one more time. Queen e4. We pin one of the attackers. And you can see now that this bishop is trapped. And white is winning. So bishop f6 is actually a poor move, but it's the second choice. So I thought I would quickly show it. But low probability that you will get this. So no knight takes e5, because that leads to simplification. We keep the tension and we follow the footpath, the steps of Garry Kasparov and knight is short, play bishop e2, and continue our attack. So let's go back. So we have covered e takes d4 and d6, right? And then we saw that f7 is a vulnerability because there's no defense. And after knight a5, we are not taking on e5, we go back, and we take with our queen on d4, threaten to take on g7. So let's go back and see where we are. So let's see if we got it completely. Bishop e7, bishop e7, d4, right? And we see here the three moves. E takes d4, and then there's queen b3, d6, queen b3, knight a5, bishop e2. So that leaves us with one move to explore. After c3, we did not cover bishop e6 yet. And bishop e6, all right? Of course, it looks very unnatural. It's very solid, right? There's two defenders on the spawn. But the bishop on c8 has difficulty being developed. And we are playing our standard move d4, right? And so let's see how it continues here. 43% of the cases, black takes. And in 36% of the cases, black plays knight f6. So let's first look at taking the castle, right? And you can see 47% continues, and we're only at 1,000 games, so 1 in 800, right? So we have to be a bit careful here. And we just play this. And now, right, the question is like how are you going to continue? And let's look at the threats, right? So knight e5 allows immediately for, right? I mean, after knight takes e5, bishop takes e5, the bishop is undefended, and we get our standard tactic in the position, right? So if we look here, right, e5 followed by rook e1, right, would be a threat. Knight e5 immediately loses because we take on e5, bishop takes e5, bishop takes f7, followed by queen d4. So let's go one move back. Go to the next one, right? Knight f6. Okay, we play e5, bishop takes e5, knight takes e5, knight takes e5, e1. And again, we are winning a piece because the knight is pinned and undefended, and we can pick it up on the next move. So let's go back, knight f6, immediately e5. And knight takes e3. There was knight e7. By now, you should say, oh, I see this configuration, right? So we are playing knight g5. And you can see most played move, 83%. Again, right? We have this attack on f7 and h7, and the game is over. So let's go back. So here we are, right? And we see actually what the danger is here. Like the danger, of course, is that c takes d4, but at the same time also there's a threat of e5 in the position. So this doesn't really work well for black. So we castle, and now we have to see how we have to go back further, right? So taking on the combination of bishop d6 and taking on d4 doesn't work. That's what we can conclude. So let's go to the second move, played in the position, right? 7,500, so below 1 in 100. Okay, both sides castle. And now, of course, the knight is threatening to take on e4. So we are playing rook e1. Now, white has a threat to play something like bishop g5, pinning the knight. So we are down to 582 games. So black could play the move h6. And we are just developing. And now the question is like, how is white going to uh, develop their bishop on c8, right? We would like to expand. So the ideas of white are related to moves like a4, sometimes queen b3, sometimes bishop d3 and knight c4 to put additional pressure here. Um, so this is a difficult position, and you can see that most of the time rook e8 is being played, right? Of course, it gives up the defense, and immediately queen b3 is played, and then we're only in 71 games, so it's unlikely that you will get it. But I just want to show you, right? A lot of players would say, I'm not comfortable with giving up my light square bishop, but look at the pressure that currently is in the position on this pawn on e5. And after taking on e5, right, it's also that, um, so there's also the threat of taking here. That's another threat, followed by something like bishop a3. And after taking on e5, white can follow up in some cases with f4, which is very strong. So I included a few more moves just for your benefit, that you can see the plan that is important in this position. So we are here, and if you think about it, here we are at 3,300 games. So in less than 1 in 200 at the moment. Um, let's go back. Let's see if we covered everything. So what did we see? Bishop d6, right? We continue with our standard move. d4 after every accepted move. Bishop c5, bishop d6, bishop e7, bishop a5. If black captures, we play castle. And now we saw that actually the combination of bishop d6 and taking on d4 is very poor, because we have this immediate threat here of e5 attacking this bishop. And 47% of the cases, d takes c3. And after knight takes c3, black is unable to finish the development, and e5 is still in the air. And already white is winning. So that was the first line. And then after knight f6, that was the second line. What we saw is both sides just castle. We defend the pawn on e4, simple chess. Now the threat is bishop d5, so h6, and we just develop our knight. And you can see here what the plan of white is. So that concludes bishop d6 and bishop e7 and bishop a5. I hope this was useful for you, and let me know after this video if you are like it, that you can train, let's say, the supporting moves, or whether you say, I prefer to have that as sidelines at the end of the variation, or whether you think it's useful, because as a beginner, it's unlikely that you will get it over the board, but it gives you support in learning the plans behind the opening. So thank you for your attention. I hope you subscribe. And also, finally, don't use priority lines in the Evans Gambit beginner's guide, because they're completely off, and I cannot make author priority lines that can be selected. I will work on that, but just study the whole course. Thank you for watching.